everybody. Happy Wednesday. Gosh, I'm losing track of days sometimes. But my name is Tinashe Kajese-Bolden, and I am the Bold Artistic Director Fellow here at the Alliance Theater. And I am so excited to be hosting today's masterclass and In Conversation. This is a series that we started as a way just to keep feeding ourselves as artists and stay in conversation with other great trailblazers in our field that we might not always be able to interact with. And today's guest is director Daniel Sullivan, who I am so thrilled to be talking to. I'm gonna do this intro of Dan. And honestly, if I said all his credits, it would take the entire hour. This man he's directed more than 40 productions on Broadway, more than any other living director, as well as numerous productions off Broadway and at regional theaters throughout the United States. From 1981 to 97, Dan served as artistic director for the Seattle Repertory Theater, which he grew into a flagship theater known as a nurturing laboratory for new work. And it was under his leadership that Seattle Rep received the 1990 Tony Award for Regional Theater. He is a key member of the 3 leading nonprofit companies that have theaters in both the Broadway and off-Broadway arenas: Manhattan Theater Club, Lincoln Center Theater, and Roundabout Theater Company. And if you've been to New York in the summer and got to experience the New York Shakespeare Festival in Central Park, chances are that it was directed by Dan, where he is also a resident artist. He is a multi-Tony nominated director and won the Tony Award for Proof by David Auburn, among many other prestigious awards for his groundbreaking direction and just truly extraordinary creativity. And he has also received the highest honor available to a theater artist, and that is the induction to the Theater Hall of Fame. But the man that you're going to meet in front of all of these incredible awards is truly one of the most generous, thoughtful, and kind people I know, who, along with his blazingly talented wife, Mimi Lieber, were mentors to me earlier in my career. Daniel was named the Swanlin Chair at my alma mater at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, where he continues to teach and nurture the next generation of cutting-edge artists. So I am so excited to introduce a true giant in our field, Mr. Daniel Sullivan.
Here I am.
There you are, Dan.
It worked.
Let's just pretend that nobody else is here. It's just you and me. So if we mess up, it's okay.
Yeah, good.
How are you?
I'm doing good. As well as can be expected in these times.
Yeah, we were talking just before we started that, like many of us, you were in the middle of a rehearsal for a show that had to get canceled or postponed. What were you working on?
I was working on a musical, which is unusual for me. But it was the musical version of The Visitor, the Tom McCarthy movie that came out in 2007. It's written by Tom Kitt and Brian Yorkey. And so we've been working on that for almost 5 years, doing workshops, et cetera. And we finally got into rehearsal, and just before we started into techs, this thing hit hard.
Wow.
Yeah. So
we can definitely all relate to that, and this sense of feeling like, you know, we're all kind of in limbo, and what do we do now? So thank you so much for being here. I'd mentioned to you earlier as well that when they said that we were going to be doing this masterclass series, you were at the top of my list. You were at the top because what I remember about you and what really spoke to me earlier in my career was just your generosity of ideas and how you always found ways to pull things out through your questions. You always ask these great questions. And so I think that today's just going to be a great time for us just to share and hear about your process. And then for you also to meet this really dynamic, powerful group of artists that work here and call Atlanta home. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
I look forward.
Yay! So several of us directors, we started our lives as actors, and I still consider myself an actor, but you began as an actor, and I think not a lot of people know, were you also a dancer?
Well, my parents, for some reason that I've never figured out, put me into a ballet school when I was 7 years old. And so I took 3 classes a week until I was 15 or 16. And that has sort of never really left me, just the lessons of bodies in space.
Mm-hmm.
I still love the art form, and sort of did that when I went to college. I was in the campus musicals, and the transition to actually acting and being in plays, real plays, happened when I was in college. And it just happened that Herbert Blau and Jules Irving, who ran the Actors Workshop in San Francisco, were both teachers there at San Francisco State College. And they invited me into their company, basically.
And then did you work professionally as an actor for a while?
Right, and I left with them for Lincoln Center. They took over Lincoln Center in 1965, and I went with them. And they didn't really quite know what to do with me. So there was a moment when Jules Irving fired a director who was working in the Mitzi Newhouse Theater. And he was about 2 weeks into rehearsal and things weren't going well. And he said to me, "You think you know what you're doing, why don't you go down there and direct that play?" So that's how I started directing.
Directing job?
Yeah, that was the first directing job. I just got sort of slammed into it.
Had you already been, like when you were in rehearsal or in like a tech or anything, were you already thinking that way? Were you watching what was going on around and thinking, I could probably do this more efficiently?
I don't know if I was thinking that I could do it necessarily, but yes, I was watching. I was a little more interested in what other people were doing on a stage than I was interested in what I was doing on stage. And I may have been a little too interested in what they were doing because I was watchful in that way. So that, I didn't know I had another skill, just the sort of structural skill that happened when I started directing. I didn't start directing because I had that skill. I just discovered it as I started working.
Were you self-critical as a young director?
I think I made probably some of the mistakes that a lot of young directors make, in that I thought I had to be in control all the time. I thought that's a real easy trap to fall into, and particularly if you're young and you really don't know what you're doing. You don't want anybody to notice. So I got over that fairly quickly, I think, but it did take a while to be able to trust. And you were talking about asking questions. That ultimately is not just the role of the teacher, but also, I think, of the director. That those even if you know the answer yourself, very often when you ask the questions, you find out a lot more than you thought you knew.
So you directed your first show, and you were in New York directing for a while, but then you went to Seattle Rep as the artistic director there. How did that come into your sphere, and what was your time there was just so prolific in your development of new plays and creating a space for new artists. Did you go there with that goal or an intention, or did you start to curate that appetite while you were there?
Yeah, the only thing that I knew was company, the idea of company, because the Actors Workshop was a company of actors. And then the Lincoln Center Company also was a company of 26 actors. So that's what I knew and wanted to sustain in my life. And so when I went to Seattle Rep, that was one of the first things I tried to do, was to create a company, or at least the atmosphere of company. I never grew the company larger than about 14 people, which is certainly not enough, but at least it became a kind of company family enterprise, which is how I had learned to create.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of those amazing partnerships you had there, especially with playwrights that began there and then have just stayed with you over the years. But I wanted to first ask is that you've had these great titles of artistic director, resident director, teaching artist. Where do you feel most comfortable? Where do you feel like you have the greatest impact?
In the rehearsal room, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm, as an administrator, I never felt particularly competent. I did it, but it wasn't, I didn't like being at a desk. I enjoyed the process of putting a season together, certainly, but I always aching to get into the room. That's, I'm not normally a very social person, but the rehearsals were always where I made up for that. Just to be surrounded by people and ideas in the rehearsal room. I'm sorry, my dog is misbehaving.
Oh, it's all good. Well, and that's where the relationships are.
Yes.
So I totally relate to that, because I've been doing more administrative observation and being involved in that more this last year, being at the Alliance, and it's very interesting. It's clear to me that it is that time in the rehearsal space that you feel most alive as an artist.
Yes.
But also, like most great directors, you have forged these long and really dynamic relationships with playwrights who they just keep coming back to collaborate with you. And her Gardner, who wrote I'm Not Rappaport and Conversations with My Father, Charlene Woodard, who you worked with on her one-woman plays, Pretty Fire, In Real Life, Neat, The Night Watcher, the great Wendy Wasserstein, who you collaborated with so many plays when you were at Seattle Rep and after, and even her final production of Third. And also Donald Margulies, the Pulitzer Prize-winning play Dinner with Friends, Sight Unseen, and Brooklyn Boy. I mean, there's just so many that you worked on, and many of these were new plays. And so I imagine that you develop these really deeply personal relationships with these writers, and all of them are very different. But I'm curious what your process is with a new play. When typically do you get involved? Has the play already been written? How much development happens in the rehearsal space?
I think it's never the same. I mean, if you take Wendy, the Heidi Chronicles was completely finished when I got a hold of it. She wanted to come out to Seattle, get away from New York and work on that play. But I don't believe there was a lot changed. I'm thinking about it now. I think it stayed in essence, I think there were a couple of art lectures that we put into the play, and I think that's about all. The second play of hers, the Sisters Rosenzweig, there was only half a play. I mean, it wasn't finished at all. And we read the first act. We were going to do it at Lincoln Center, and the thing just wasn't finished. And so we then were working with a deadline in terms of putting it together. But so there was very, very different ways of working.
So how do you get a playwright to either increase or how do you fertilize the dramatic stakes of a play when it's either not there or it just needs more? I mean, it sounds like you very much wear the hat of dramaturg.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so the earlier collaborations, did you learn something about, say, Wendy as a writer that then you had that shorthand with her the second time around?
Yeah, she would just give me pages longhand, basically, and rather shyly, just as possibilities. And then we would basically just discuss what the goal was, where we were actually heading, what the story really needed to be. Then she'd go off and come back with another idea. So that's an ideal relationship, let's put it that way.
Right.
That I would always stay away from trying to push a certain particular storyline, and really just stay as close to the structural ideas as I possibly can. Even if I had story ideas, I don't want to impose those.
Is it a similar process when you're working with actors in a rehearsal room? Like, how much is that give and take, that push and that weight?
Yeah, it's so specific to how an actor works, and discovering that in a rehearsal process, I think, is 50% of the work at least. I do like to work with a lot of the same people, partly because I know what that process is, but there's all the process of discovery of how an actor works, at what point you can have an idea about something that actor could be doing, and you have to figure out when is that time, when do I say this thing? The editorial process in directing is all important. That is the editing your own thoughts, knowing when to say a thing. When is an actor going to be ready to hear the thing you need to say? And I think all actors are different in that respect. There are some actors that you could they're hungry to know from the very beginning. And there are other actors who need to be brought along slowly. And there are other actors that you just want to follow, that you just didn't realize that was what was possible. And they can teach you a whole lot in the course of a rehearsal period.
How much do you feel like you need to know about them in an audition?
Know about the actor?
Yeah, I mean, I so understand and appreciate the notion of working with people that you already have a shorthand with, but you still audition folk, and you also work with a lot of celebrities. And so I think, especially when there are named people who the audience recognizes them from a TV show or a film and have a certain expectation of what they're going to do, how do you prepare them for a Daniel Sullivan production?
Well, if you're working with somebody famous, hopefully you've chosen that person because of the fit that person has with the character as opposed to their fame. So that part of it is already taken care of. But then being able to discover in talking about the play and the role that somehow we're on the same page as to what needs to happen and how one develops this character over a period of time. And getting some understanding of what the process that actor has in terms of how they want to work also. I think that's very important. So that's, that takes a lot of just discussions, I think, just talking about it, talking about the play. My favorite part of a rehearsal period, I don't know about you, but for me, it's the first week of rehearsal. I love the period at the table. I love the play of ideas between actors and director. And I'm always just a little sad to get up from the table. So now we have to do it.
Now we have to actually do the work.
Yes, right.
Yes. It reminds me so much. I remember when you were rehearsing for In Real Life with Charlene Woodard.
Yeah.
Go at U of I, and you were there because you are the Swanlin Chair at the University of Illinois, my alma mater, and you had directed all of her autobiographical plays.
Yeah.
And that was the final one. And I remember there were a couple of things that just stand out to me about this. One was the striking difference between your personality and Charlene Woodard's personality. She was this explosive powerhouse African-American woman who, for me, I had not been around a lot of diversity. And her energy was explosive, and seeing the two of you work together was so fascinating to me. And she with In Real Life, just to catch everybody up, if you're not familiar with the play, it's this wandering tribute to when she came to Manhattan in the 1970s, and she talks about her time doing Ain't Misbehavin'. And it was really during a period of a great rise of Black drama. And of course, when for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough was auditioning, and there's this bit in the play that Charlene talks about auditioning for that role and getting rejected for it. And she just had this immortal wail. And I had to go back to the script because I was like, what was it that she said? And she said, I've been Black my whole life and I'm not fit to be a colored girl. And I remember being in rehearsal and you just cracking up, all of us laughing. And my question is, while her stories weren't specifically about her ethnicity or African-American, her African-American culture is just such a big part of her stories and her writing. And then you think about Donald Margulies, whose Jewish Brooklyn upbringing really influenced his early writing. My question is that for you, a white male director from Colorado, when you have been so instrumental in helping craft these really powerful productions that deal with themes and cultures that you may not have grown up around. Do you have to prepare for that in a different way as a director? Is that necessary?
I guess it depends on the project. I mean, Charlene herself is the research. She is. You spend 3 hours with Charlene. You're ready. You're ready to work. That she wears herself on her sleeve in a way. It's all out there, and in the case of that work, it was it's all permission as far as a director is concerned. You know, it's a matter of gathering information. So the things that you would need as a director to research is just all there on the page.
You just need to be present.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I guess it has to do with just the empathy itself. You know, that is you, and it may be the fact that I was an actor is that I sort of enter in empathetically into the characters' personas. So so many of those decisions are the decisions, actually, so many of those things that happen in productions is really about just appropriate behavior for those characters. You have to sort of become those characters in your thinking, putting it together. You know, research, I rely almost entirely on the playwrights in terms of gathering the information I need, rather than, you know, a lot of book learned research. Certainly, historically, you have to be able to do that. And certainly when I do Shakespeare, it's a whole lot of research of a period that, in fact, I usually don't use because I usually find another period to do the work in. But it's necessary to understand the nature of the thing you decide not to do. You know?
Yeah. You have this great quote about why you love to work with Shakespeare. You said, "I love to do Shakespeare because I just love to spend time in his mind."
Yes. Yes.
I love that. And you traffic so seamlessly between Shakespeare and contemporary plays. What is about your approach to working with a Shakespearean text that you love to keep going back to?
It's just the language itself. I just think it's the beauty of the language. When I teach Shakespeare, when I work with students on Shakespeare, we usually start with the sonnets, stay in the sonnets for a long time, so that you're not applying character necessarily to what you're doing. You're not trying to find the character. You're just bathing in the language. So that you get used to that, and so that you can appreciate that before you ever get into the actual telling the stories that Shakespeare wants to tell. But it's that and the broad humanity of Shakespeare's writing, that, and the fact that, you know, you can approach it from so many different angles, that every time you're doing Shakespeare, it finds its way to relate to what's going on, not just in your life, but in the life around you.
And there's so many ways that it can be contemporized. So there are plenty of windows and doors that a modern audience can access and get to. Which is really thrilling and exciting. And I'm glad that you mentioned teaching, because I do have one question. My next question is going to be my last one for Dan and I. Well, that's not a promise. But what I would say is that for those of you who have questions, after this question, I'd love you to go ahead, raise your hands, and we will start calling on you and just open up the conversation to the group, because I'm sure you've got some pressing things you want to talk to Dan about. But you were such a great mentor to me in school, and what I took from my training in general, but also specifically from you, is that the artistic process in theater it requires this understanding of the human body and spirit and mind, and that an artist's growth demands this consistent evolution and metamorphosis as we pursue what it means to be human. And when I think about directors that have really influenced me and helped me in my career, they were the ones that stretched my curiosity. They were the ones that were very much like a teacher. When I was in rehearsal, I felt like I was in this great classroom. What is it about teaching that you love?
I guess it's not a matter of sort of imparting wisdom. Because I think, number one, I wouldn't be terribly good at doing that, but it's about discovery. And that, I think sometimes it's a little difficult for students of mine to sort of understand that to begin with, that they're going to learn more from themselves in the process than they are from me, and I'm going to learn, so that we share that. But the same thing that you do as a director, which is to ask questions, is I think what you do as a teacher also. It's not that different. The difference is you're not necessarily looking for a result as you are when you're directing. You have to have a result. You have to end up putting it on. But
and what happens if you, as a director, you don't get the answer you wanted?
Yes. Well, that happens let's say infrequently, but it does happen.
Good. Yeah. That's great. Okay, I'm gonna open up the questions. If anybody wants to raise their hand, you will get unmuted. I see Sydney has a question. Hey, Sydney, how are you? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Hi. So I know you all touched on this a bit earlier, but I was just wondering, in terms of approaching original work, what do you suggest that actors do? So like, do you suggest maybe, or do you encourage like playing around with the text in the beginning, or like doing some form of research, or does it just kind of vary by like what you're working on?
When you say playing around with the text, what do you refer to specifically?
So how you all talked in the beginning about like the beginning stages, the first few rehearsals,
Right.
just like, sitting at the table, like reading through the text, like through the script. That's basically what I was meant by that.
Right. I always love it when there is broad familiarity with the text when you in the first week, so that actors come with ideas, but also the kind of necessary connections happen between actors. So it's not so much what I can do with my role, but right away you're exploring how is what I'm doing affected by the person I'm talking to? What is this relationship like? And that only happens through connection. I'm always a little disappointed when we start working in that first week and that there's so much dissimilarity between the processes of the actors. Some people are just buried in the script. Some people are there obviously wanting connection and not able to have it. So certainly for the first few days, for me, it's just getting conversation going about the play and the circumstances of the play, so that ideas start to move around the room, and those connections happen anyway. So by the time you really return to the text, relationships have been established already. I always like it when, I don't know if this happens to you, but very often I find there's some actor at some point starts to get up and
just start moving around.
you get that impulse, to get up, and that, okay, now it's time. It's time to do that. Yeah.
Well, I can't sit on my impulses any longer. I gotta see
Yeah.
what this feels, what this action and this need feels like in motion.
That's right. Exactly.
You want to start testing your instincts.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there was another question. Was it Rob? Oh, wait, let me see. Robert, did he have a question?
Yes, that is me.
Hey.
Hey, similar to the question that was actually just asked, obviously you're one of the most highly regarded people in the theater conversation to help facilitate new work. As someone who also seeks to become a new work director, I'm interested in what you view as your biggest strengths that you bring to the table when you're sitting down with a new work for the first time.
Strengths. You talk about facilitating. I think that's, whether it's a strength or not, it's what I do. I also, in doing new work, certainly in the beginning, the playwright is also the dramaturg, as far as I'm concerned, in the beginning. That's the source. So drawing out, in some cases, I found writers a little hesitant, a little shy of speaking in the room. And you got to sort of have to let them know before you actually start that that's going to be the way you're going to work. They're going to have to come forward, both to defend their work and to enhance their work. Sorry, my dog is misbehaving. So that's the primary thing, I think, that no one, I think, can describe the play better than the writer. And if that writer is shy of it, they have to learn in the process not to be, because they're all important in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have another question from, let's see, Jennifer Alice, you had your hand up.
Hey, yeah, thanks for being here, Daniel.
Uh-huh.
So I judge that we all as directors have some pivotal experiences in our career that sort of help demarcate and define our philosophy as directors. And I was just wondering, what was a process or a show that you worked on where you learned one of those core philosophies about yourself as a director? And so what was that philosophy and how did the experience help shape it?
Oh, gosh. Well, I could tell you a story about what happened to me as a young director. I had done a few things, and I taught for a while at Cal Arts. And while I was there, some friends of mine who ran the South Coast Rep called me and asked me to do Taming of the Shrew. So I decided to do it as sort of barnyard production, with animals around and chickens and things like that.
Naturally.
Yeah, and I had an idea, just a visual idea, that at the beginning of the play, the Christopher Sly sequence where this drunk comes into the tavern, and that's where the play is performed in Shakespeare's version. I decided that I wanted the mistress of the inn to come out at the beginning and throw open the window shutters. The chicken would jump in through the window. And so the first tech, the mistress of the inn comes out, throws open the shutters of the window, and nothing happens. There's no chicken. And so I stopped the rehearsal. And I said, where are my fucking chickens? And they said, the tech director said, oh, we thought you were kidding. So I want my chickens. This whole moment depends on these chickens. So the next day, the tech director walks into the room and he's got a big garbage pail and it's filled with live chickens. And they're sort of clawing at each other. And he says, here's your damn chickens. And he throws the thing down. So that night was the first preview. And they had to sedate the chickens because they were so confused. So curtain goes up, Mistress of the Inn comes out, throws open the shutters of the window, and an unconscious chicken is thrown in through the window. Then for the next 10 minutes of the scene, this chicken comes back to consciousness very slowly.
No.
And is stumbling around the stage. The audience is in stitches. The actors finally are laughing so hard they actually leave the stage. The lesson is you have to be flexible. You can't, you know, that you are not necessarily in control. And that, you know, to me is, has been the biggest single lesson and what I try to remember whenever I work, that, you know, direction is as much about giving up as it is in terms of holding on and being in control, knowing when to say, this isn't worth it. That's the single largest lesson I think I ever learned.
Thank you.
That is a great lesson and a great story. I mean, at least you didn't choose goats or something, a larger animal that you wanted thrown in there.
No, I've pretty much avoided animals of any kind since then.
From then on, I think that's a great tip.
This dog of mine was bothering me terribly, but go ahead.
Richard Gardner. Hey, Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, Dan, thanks for joining us. I'm curious about how we all as artists are thinking about our craft right now. Say 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you're at the first day of rehearsal, sitting around the table. What do you think you'll say differently then than you might have before we all were separated from each other?
Oh, you know, I dream of the opportunity to be back in a rehearsal period. I was just thinking about that today, the freedom, and will that freedom be in any way constricted by this experience? You know? Just physical behavior itself. I think it'll take some time before the ease of physical communication, touching, all the things that come so easily to us in the theater will feel real again. Will feel safe. Just being locked away as we have been, and basically getting out of prison here is it can't help but affect the work, and maybe in a good way. Who knows? You know, maybe this is useful to us. We hope it's useful socially, medically, in terms of learning a lesson, but hopefully we'll find a way to let the hurts that have happened to us affect in a good way our work.
Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. That is definitely something that we are all thinking about as we prepare for what that phase is. There is a question from Miles. Hey, Miles.
Hi, I had a question. Thank you so much for coming, by the way. I had a question regarding getting your vision in setting up your vision when you're getting ready to start a new work. I oftentimes find that I have a similar thing that we were talking about earlier, where there's that that need and desire to want to control things, and it's sort of where do you draw the line of what I call instinct versus opportunity, in which you kind of go with and falling in line with your vision, and then deciding where exactly you switch over to, okay, maybe there might be a room to adapt this idea, or maybe this is something different, or going with your gut, basically. It's when do you go with your gut and when do you kind of go with the flow?
Yeah, that's a good, huge question. There are certain, I think that's all very guided by the thing you're doing yourself. That is, if you're doing Shakespeare, whatever play, and you've taken a big chance in terms of how you're going to set it, how you think the play reverberates with what's happening in the world, that you've already taken that chance. You've taken that chance, and just visually already, it's done. It's made. So it's not as though 2 weeks into the rehearsal period you can change your mind about what this play means. It's written. If you're doing a contemporary work, and that you decide that you've generalized in some way how the play is going to be set and put on, so that you can make specific discoveries inside it, and not small ones but large ones, then it's another thing entirely, I think. I think very much it depends on the play, because the initial commitment to how you do it, it can either be terribly strong, or it's something that you can leave open and take that chance.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Jaron Williams, you have a question?
Yes, Jaron Williams.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Jaron. And now I see your picture and I know exactly who is on the call. This is a really talented actor and one of Keith's students at Morehouse.
Thank you all for having this conversation. It's definitely much needed. And in times like this, it's great to hear the creative side of things all the time. My question is, what kept you driven and motivated through the difficulties and obstacles of the industry?
That's a question I probably need to ask myself, since it's been a very long time. But I guess it's the play that restarts you every time, right? It's wanting to see the play, and the play done this way. You want to see it, and I think that I have had extraordinary luck, and believe me, luck has so much to do with it. When I came when I was a young man and married with a little baby. The wife of the artistic director at the Actors Workshop in San Francisco just loved this little baby. So when they were invited to go to New York, that company, the wife of the artistic director couldn't imagine not being around that baby anymore. So they chose 10 people from that company to go to New York. And I was included for no apparent reason, except for that this wonderful baby. And so these accidents happen to you, some of them good, some of them bad, but almost all of the wonderful things that have happened to me in my life have been the results of those kinds of happy accidents, and sort of, I guess, being open to them happening. When Jules Irving said, "You think you know what you're doing? Why don't you go down there and direct that play?" I could have said no, you know, but I did. I think being open to those, if you chart too careful a future for yourself, I think that can sometimes be dangerous because you're not open to these happy accidents.
Oh, that's so true. Staying open. It's also scary.
Yeah,
So being willing to be uncomfortable and scared and just trust that it's in you. Yeah. We got time for these last two questions. Let's hear from, is it Myra?
Sorry. Hi, it's Myra.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to interview / lead a conversation like this with one of my favorite playwrights, Donald Margulies, at a theater conference. And someone asked him the question, what did he look for in a director? What made him want to work with a particular director? And he said, and I have a feeling he was probably talking about you, that what appeals to him about a director is someone who can tell him something about his own work that he himself was not even aware of or didn't even know.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us an instance where either with Donald Margulies' work or another playwright's work that you were able to tell that playwright something about his or her work that they didn't even know, either dramaturgically or within the staging of it?
Yeah, I think there are places, times certainly dramaturgically where I've been helpful, but I do think that playwrights learn more in rehearsals from actors, and that may have to do with your input, certainly. Where a writer will say, I never saw the scene that way, but that works, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That probably you're always going to see behavior in a different way from the writer. The best writers are open to that, I think. And if the difference is one that makes the scene better, then that's great. But I do think it has to do, it's not a matter of sitting around and discussing it with the writer. I think you do discuss the scenes, but most of that has to do with, I find you learn more about the play in terms of casting with a playwright, because you begin to understand how they see the character. and why one actor is less right for a role than another, then things start to come together for you. And I've had disagreements with playwrights about casting, but I begin to understand the writer's approach to the story that way.
Thank you.
And we're going to take our last question from Derek. I couldn't possibly have butchered your name, right?
No, it was right. It was right. Hi, how you doing, Daniel? Thank you so much for doing this masterclass. I have a question as an actor. When I'm a part of a new play process, how do you put your voice in the room to kind of advocate for your character without, I guess, overstepping boundaries, or I guess without like throwing off the writer or director's like creative process?
Right. I guess it depends on what the advocacy is. But I've always felt that in rehearsals, that what you do in rehearsal is advocacy. I don't think it's necessarily sitting around and advocating. Not that doesn't happen in the rehearsal process, but it's hard when you sit down at the table on the first rehearsal of a new play. That's not necessarily time to advocate for your character. That's a writer hearing their work for the first time, and with all the insecurities that brings. That's the director beginning to understand how it all works and comes together. It may be what we're talking about is just timing. When do you say? When do you advocate as opposed to how? But it feels as, and I think that's key to so much, in the same way that I was talking about. There's a time to say something as a director to an actor, even if you feel it early. And I think the same is true in terms of dealing with writers. Writers can make changes very quickly, very easily. But really understanding your place in a play as you work, that's the first process. And then if there are deficiencies or changes that you think would be good, I think that can come up organically. But it can feel in early stages like a challenge to a writer, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Thank you so much. I told you this hour was going to go by super fast. And I think about one of the questions, the question that Richard had about, like, what will you say when we all are able to gather again? And what I hope that our artistic community here in Atlanta is going to be able to say is that even though we were all separated and we were trying to still create and grow in these silos, that our opportunity to learn was expanded because of conversations like this. And I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful to what you give to our practice, and just your availability as a human being is such a gift. And I thank you. I thank Mimi, and we will get you to Atlanta very soon to come play.
Can't wait. Thanks, Tinashe, and thank you all. It's been fun.